Hello, I would like to talk about rubric systems in SBG course. And when I talk about a rubric in an SBG course, I do not mean the traditional rubric that might be for a particular assignment. I'm actually talking about rubrics that assess a particular learning target or learning targets. And before we look at those, I want to sort of talk about some characteristics of these rubrics. The focus must be on performance, so they must be performance reference. So you're thinking about what evidence the student is showing for understanding of a target. It's not based on a gut feeling, but it's based on specific indicators. So these are actions and behaviors that students are taking. So we're moving away from using terms like students will understand, students will know, but to actual behavior. So they will evaluate, they will create. The benefit of these rubrics is that we're no longer talking about being on a 0 to 100% scale, which has, when you think about it, 59 chances to fail and only 10 chances for an A. So we're condensing those levels to move away from measurement error. And once we condense those levels, then we're more likely to accurately portray learning. Now, some questions you need to ask when you're designing your rubrics is, first of all, what do you consider as proficient? So if you're thinking about depth of knowledge or Bloom's taxonomy, what do you see as proficient for learning targets? How many rubrics will you use? What types of rubrics will you use? And we'll talk about that in a few moments. How many levels in your rubric are you going to have? What will be your description for each level? So I first want to start with sort of a generic rubric that could be used for a learning target. This generic rubric that you see here has 4 levels, and the lowest level would be sort of no understanding, no evidence of learning, and then moving up to level 2, 3, and 4. Typically, level 3 would be proficient. So this is where you want all students to be able. This is the bare minimum. 4 would be for the exceptional student. 2 would be sort of approaching proficiency. What's simplistic about this rubric is that you can use it for all of the learning targets. So you don't have to design multiple rubrics. A different type of rubric, and this was designed by Robert Marzano, what we call tiered learning targets. The idea with this rubric is that what's different from the generic rubric is that each learning target has its own unique rubric. So you're not using the same 1, 2, 3, 4 levels for every learning target, but every learning target has its own rubric. And the premise of this is that, the benefit of this, while you have to sort of go through the process of creating multiple rubrics, is that you can really tailor your rubric to the particular learning target. So if we go back to the generic rubric for a moment, you're assuming that for every single learning target in your course, that level 3, where they can apply it to new situations, that is the standard for all of the learning targets. But if we go back to the tiered learning target, that you can decide based on the learning target, what is a level 4 and what is a level 2, what is a level 3. And that can be different for each learning target. If we just sort of explain this rubric, what you see here is that level 3 or proficient or whatever you want to call it, that is your target learning goal. This is where you want all your students to be, right? And then you would rewrite that learning goal into a simpler version, and then you would rewrite that learning target for a level 2, and then you would rewrite the learning target for level 4 in a more complex version of that same learning target. And then level 1 and 0 would be the same for all of the tiered learning targets. So level 1 would be with help, there's some success at level 2 and level 3. Level 0 would be that even with help, even with accommodations, there's no success. So I want to give you some examples. First, I'll start off with a simple example of a tiered learning target rubric. And I think math would be an easy way to see this in action. So let's say you're in a middle school or elementary school. The students need to be able to solve multiplication tables. So you're expecting that they have memorized all of the combinations. So from 0 times 0 all the way to 12 by 12, right? So that's the level 3. Now you can rewrite that for a level 2. So maybe instead of going from 12 times 12, they can only get through 9 times 9. And then for a level 4, you would go beyond the 12 by 12. So those are students who can multiply, 15 times 12. And they're moving to more rigorous multiplication problems that can't just be memorized from the multiplication table. So that would be a level 4. And then level 0 and 1 are the same as any other learning target. So this is, I think, a straightforward way to see the tiered learning targets in action. You can apply this in other types of courses. So here is one from a history class about Napoleon. So maybe the teacher says that all students should be able to make a flowchart showing the rise and fall of Napoleon. And so a harder version of that might be, that they can also compare and contrast Napoleon to other military and political leaders. So if you can do that, you're level 4. But maybe instead of being able to make the flowchart showing the rise and fall of Napoleon, maybe an easier version of that is they can recall or memorize some information about the rise and fall of Napoleon. So you can see in this rubric, you have your level 3, which is where you want all your students to be. But then you make it harder for level 4. And then in level 2, now they just, doing sort of a lower blooms or a lower depth of knowledge.